Welcome to Sicha Beis, Parshas Matos, and Chelek Yud Gimel, page 110. The Parshas Einu Mesuper. In this week's Parsha, the Torah relates the story Shalachrei Shenotzchu Bnei Yisrael es Midyan. After the Yidden were victorious over their war with Midyan, Vayaviu es Hashvi u'Malkoyach v'chulu. The Yidden brought their captives, the plunder. So Tziva HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Eibishter commands the Yidden. So es Reish Malkoyach, take account of the plunder, Hashvi, the captives, Ba'adam, the people, Ba'behema, the animals, V'gaimer, and then V'chatzisa Samalkoyach, all the plunder has to be divided. Ben Teifsi Amochama Yetzim Latzava, half for the people that actually went out in battle, Uven Kol Eida, and the other half should go to all of the rest of the Yidden. Chetzia Le'elu, V'chetzia Le'elu. Half for the ones that went out to war, and the half to rest of Klal Yisrael. And then what should be done with it? V'harimaisa meches l'Hashem, and a tax, sort of a meiser, a tax should be given to the Eibishter, me'eis anshe ha'milchama v'gaimer, from the half that the people that went out into war have. How much should the tax be? Echad nefesh mechamesh hameis v'gaimer. 1 of 500 will go to the Kohen. And that tax will go to a Lazar HaKoyen. Umimachtzis b'nei Yisrael, the other half of the plunder that goes to all the Yidden. Tikach, you also take a tax, echod ochos min hachamishim, a 50th. V'nesata oisa lalaviyim v'goymer, and that tax should be given to the Leviyim. U'mesayim akosov, and then the Torah concludes, vayas Moshe ve'elazar HaKoyen kashetziv Hashem es Moshe. They fulfilled the mitzvah, the command of the Eibishter. Achakach, then after this, Mefaret HaKosov, the Torah elaborates and says, Schum HaMolkoyach shel kol min umin, the exact number of all the plunder, of every single min separately. The humans, the cattle, the donkeys, the sheep, every single thing, the Torah gives a number of how much there were. Schum HaMachtzes shel kol min umin hashayach l'toivsi al-milchama. And the Torah gives you the number of the half that went to those that went out in battle. Then the Torah also says what the tax was. They had to give 1 of 500 to the Kohanim, what that was, what that amount was. And then the Torah also tells us, and it says each min specifically exactly how much it was. And the other half, the other half that went to the rest of Klal Yisrael, the Torah also tells us the exact amount of how much there was. Umesayim, and then the Torah just concludes, Umimachtzis b'nei Yisrael esa ochos echad min hachamishim. From all these plunder from that went to the Yidden, 1/50th went for a tax to Levim. And ve'ena mefaret misparim. Here, the Torah does not elaborate to say exactly what a 50th was of each one of the species that they received. So, the Rebbe has over here two very basic questions. L'chayre eina moving klal. That's at first glance. There's something that's not understood here at all. Lama mayrech hakosov lefaret kol misparim eila. Why is the Torah going into such an arichis, describing exactly the amounts, the numbers of what there were? Wouldn't it be enough if the Torah would just simply say, Vayas Moshe v'Elazar HaKoyen kashetziv Hashem es Moshe? That Moshe and Elazar HaKoyen followed the mitzvah and they divided it amongst the ones that went into battle and amongst the Yidden. And they saw that they saw to it that they gave meiser, or the tax, for whatever had to be given, and they did everything the way it was they were told to do. That's all. Why does it matter to us? Ladas mispar hamalkoyach b'chlal, to know even just the number in general of how much it was, the plunder that they all got. V'shakol minu min bifrat. And not only that, the Torah spells out specifically of every species, the humans, the animals, and the cattle, the sheep, everything. The Torah spells out very specifically the numbers of what they got. Why does the Torah have to go into all this detail? Now, even if you're going to say, even if you're going to say, for whatever reason, the Torah wants to share all the details of what happened here, exactly how much they got, how much plunder was there, and from each min, exactly how much they got. But harei, maspik leidia cheshbon hamalkoyach, Wouldn't it be enough for the Torah to say exactly the number of how much plunder they had? Then it would be self-understood. What is the half? If you take that full number and you divide it in half, it would be self-understood what half of that is for the people that went into battle. And the kamhu echad mechamesh meyes, and how much is 1 of 500 would also be self-understood. And the chem mispar hamachtzes hashenis, and what the second half that went to Klal Yisrael would also be self-understood. So even if the Torah wants to tell us the exact number of what they got, and the exact number of each min of what they got, but then to say also the second half, that the Yidden, they divided it in two between the ones that went to battle and the rest of the Yidden, it's obvious, you divide it into two, you'll know exactly what the half is. And then 1 of 500, how much that is, you can calculate it on your own. Why does the Torah have to go into all this? But now comes the question on the other hand. If for whatever reason, there's a reason why the Torah has to spell out specifically the first half, the second half, and then the meches, the tax that they gave from the half of the ones that went to battle. 1 of 500, exactly how much it was. So why does the Torah not tell us the exact count of what was a 50th that Klal Yisrael gave tax to the Leviim? That the Torah just says they gave a 50th, and it does not spell out the number. Why doesn't it spell out the number there? To make another important point there. These are questions in the simple pshat of the pasuk. A question like this, Rashi should have addressed. It was spoken many times. It's Rashi's derech in his Pirush on Chumash, Levaya kol dover hakoshe b'limud pshutim shel ksuvim. He answers every question that comes up in the simple pshat of the pasuk. Umekivin shein Rashi mitaretz kush yisanal, since Rashi does not answer these questions, harimizeh echocha, this itself proves sheb'limud haksuvim al pi pshutim shel mikra a makom l'kush yiselu. This is not a question. You learn the psukim and you pay attention to the pshat of the pasuk. It's self-evident why it was necessary for the Torah to spell out all of these numbers. And Rashi, so much so that Rashi doesn't even have to address it. The Ramban answers here and addresses part of the question that the Rebbe asks, and the Ramban says as follows. The Torah has to talk about this detail. Sheyaskir kama hamechza, to tell you what was the half that they received, the kama hameches, and also to tell you what was the tax they paid. Lahidiyah, to let us know the following thing: Ki min hayom shelakhu al koyach hazeh, from the day that they received this plunder, ad shemanu oisai, until the day that they actually counted all of it, v'chatzu oisai, and then divided all of it, ve'frishu mimenu hameches, and then they also separated the tax, and they gave it to Elazar Kohen, Mikol HaMikneh, from all of the cattle they had, HaMikneh HaGodel Hazeh, from this massive amount of cattle they had, Le'meisaf Echad. Not one died along the way. There was not one that was missing over all this period of time of the counting, dividing, and separating the tax. And the same is also true with the other half that went to all of Klal Yisrael, and they gave a tax to the Leviim. The number that they took right in the beginning, that's the number that they had a while later after it was divided than when they gave the tax. That's a ness that happened over here, that nothing died throughout this entire time. So that's what the Torah is letting us know here, a tremendous miracle that happened, something extremely unusual. Avol, so the Rebbe says about this teretz of the Ramban, the Ramban does not address the second question of the Rebbe, that why when it comes to the tax of the Leviim does the Torah not spell out exactly what the amount of their tax was. Even when you learn in Pshat, so there's the rule that it says, the Rebbe always quotes this from the name of the Ran, the Eibishter never performs a miracle for no reason. And this is something that's understood and accepted even when you learn the pshat of the pasuk. So if so, this pshat of the Ramban that tells us that there was a nest that happened, the lashon of the Ramban is v'zen nest, that this is a miracle that occurred there. So the question is, what's the point of this miracle? So the pshat of the Ramban actually adds another question. that, okay, the Torah is spelling this all out to tell us a miracle. What's the point of the Eibishter making such a kind of ness, which seems to have absolutely no benefit whatsoever? Now you're going to say, well, the benefit of the ness is that there was nothing of the possessions of the Yidden that they had here that was lacking. That the Eibishter protected it all, and the Yidden had everything they took. So the Rebbe says this is very unusual. We don't find that the Eibishter performs a miracle. So the point here is for the Yidden to have their money, to Yidden to have what they need. So how does the Eibishter ensure that Yidden have what they need? By making sure that nothing passes, but nothing dies, and they have the exact same amount. We don't find ever that the Eibishter makes a ness in this kind of way. If the point here is that the Yidden should have enough money that they need, enough possessions of what they need, there's many ways through natural means that the Eibishter can see to it that the Yidden should have everything they need. It's not necessary. If that's the purpose of the ness, that Yidden should have what they need, it's not necessary to perform a ness in order for this purpose. It could happen through many other natural means that the Eibishter can do. So therefore, the Rebbe does not accept the pshat of the Ramban, that the Torah here is coming to let us know of a ness that occurred. So we're back to our original question. What's the purpose of the Torah going through all of the details of the numbers, the half, the way it was divided, and the tax, the way it was given? What's this all about? So the pshat here is as follows. If all it would say in the Torah is the mitzvah that the Eibishter says, to give the tax 1 of 500, 1 of 50, to give to the Kayanim, to give to the Leviim, if that was the mitzvah that the Torah said. And then the Torah would say, Vayas Moshe v'Goyme, that Moshe fulfilled this mitzvah. The Sulai, and it wouldn't tell you any of the numbers over here whatsoever. Makim l'shayla gedayla v'dafka al pipashtus anyanim. That you would be left with a big question, and this is a question in looking simply at what happened here. Apitava. If you look at things naturally, b'shvi u'malkayachul ba'adam b'behemah. So when you have captives, you have plunder, whether the people, whether the animals, le'shchiachu klalu klal. It's not at all common. Asha mispar, the cholminu min b'fnei atzmai, that the amount, the total sum number of every single min that you have, yeh meduyek at kedei kach, it should be such a round number, such a precise number, shemachtzisa shall kol minu min b'fnei atzmai, that not only the total sum number of everything you have is a round number, is a number that could be divided equally, but each individual min as well should divide. There should be a very specific round number, and yucholak lekvutzes shel chamishim v'shel chamesh meyos b'lishi yivasar eidef, and it should be a number that you could divide it into 50s, 1 of 50 or 1 of 500, and there should be no extra whatsoever. You're going to divide 1 of 50, and then you're going to have some remainder. You're going to have another 25 that are left over. What do I do with them now? What kind of a tax should I take from the 25 left over? You have 1 of 500, you have 500, and you have extra. You have extra 100, 200, 300, whatever it is. You should expect, when you have such a big number of plunder, and with different meaning that they have, that there's going to be some remainder over here that we're going to have to figure out what's the mitzvah of the Eibishter. How could we fulfill the mitzvah of the Eibishter when we get to this leftovers? Ubalasha Chazal, there's an expression that the Gemara says, Iyaf shel etzamtzem, that regarding many things that have to be very exact, we can't expect it humanly or naturally to be so exact with the numbers over here as well. It should be so exact that all of the numbers of each one of the minim that the Yidden had in their plunder should be exact. It should be divided up, and it should be 1 of 50, 1 of 500, and they give the tax, and there's no leftovers. Everything is perfectly sound exact. This is something that's very unusual. So over here, in our case, the mitzvah was to take a 50th of the portion that Yidden received, and to take 1 of 500 from the portion that the people went out in the army. If the Torah would not spell out the actual numbers here, so you would expect that there has to be another additional detail that the Torah should clarify. What should be done with the leftovers? How do we fulfill this mitzvah regarding the leftovers? The Torah doesn't say a word about this. So if the Torah doesn't address this, there's something missing over here. How could you say that Moshe Rabbeinu fulfilled the mitzvah, and we have no idea how could we expect, how would it be possible that there was no leftovers whatsoever, and he was able to do the mitzvah perfectly? So therefore the Torah comes and spells out. It says exactly what the plunder was. All of the numbers the Torah says in detail, of each min separately, that over here something unusual happened. That there was the exact numbers in each min separately. There was the exact number that could be divided, and then to take the tax of a 50th or 1 of 500, and there was no leftovers. And there was actually no leftovers whatsoever, so the mitzvah that they had to give this tax was fulfilled perfectly, nothing extra. And therefore the Torah is spelling out this unusual thing that happened here that enabled them to fulfill this mitzvah without any issues whatsoever. And the Torah does not have to clarify what we do with the leftovers. Now the Rebbe clarifies, this is not considered to be a miracle that shatters the rules of nature. Comparing it to a real miracle, for example, one of the first miracles you have in Torah, where Avraham Avinu is thrown into a furnace of fire and the fire doesn't burn him. So that's something which is literally supernatural. But over here, the fact that you have this round number, these perfect numbers, to be able to fulfill this mitzvah, it's not something which is totally supernatural. It's just something that's very unusual. There's nothing in nature that forces us to say that it's impossible for there to have these perfect round numbers. It's completely unusual. And it's something that the Torah has to clarify. If the Torah wouldn't say this, I would expect that what happened was they definitely had leftovers. And I would be left wondering, so how did they fulfill the mitzvah? What do they do with all those leftovers? So on one hand, it's not a nes. So we don't have the question that the Rebbe asked before in the Ramban, which said, V'zen nes, that there's a nes that occurred over here. But at the same time, it is something that's not so unusual that it's necessary for the Torah to address this, to explain how the mitzvah was fulfilled if we don't find in the Torah that it speaks about the leftovers. The Rebbe continues, okay, so this is the general hesber of why the Torah has to give the number in general of all the plunder, and also specifically of each min bifnei atzmai, to see that it was they had the ability to fulfill the mitzvah of each min separately to give the exact amount necessary. However, the question still is, aval adayin in a movement called sarkoi, the question still remains, the l'chayre sof sof have a milsid l'shchiche klal uklal. This is, after all, something, it's not a miracle, it doesn't defy the laws of nature, but it is something which is extremely unusual. So why did this happen? What was the reason that such an unusual thing happens, that they have the exact numbers needed to fulfill this mitzvah? So the answer is, as you can see here in the way the Torah itself explains what the mitzvah is. That you should mitzvah, that you should give the tax from the part that went to the people that went out to the war, 1 of 500. The pasuk says again, take from their half and you should give it to Allah Zarakoyim. So this is these are extra words. When the Torah writes it already said before that in the pasuk, you're going to give from that part that went to these people 1 of 500. Why does it say again, from their half you should take? The fact that the Torah says these words, you should take from their half. These words at first glance are extra. So what you see here is that the Eibishter's desire was that the tax that should be taken, whether it's the 50th or 1 from 500, it should be taken fully. From each half, the tax should be taken fully from the entire half. Nothing should be left out. There should be no shirayim whatsoever. That was the Eibishter's Ratzon. Regarding the Eibishter's Ratzon itself, We can't ask any questions why the Eibishter wanted it to be this way, as the Rebbe points out in the footnote. That's not our question. But the Pasuk is letting us know that the Eibishter wanted the tax to be taken, in this case, fully, from the entire amount, without any leftovers. If there would have been leftovers, from that leftovers, you wouldn't be able to take anything. You would have to figure out what to do with it. What does the Eibishter want? But the fact is that this tax would not be, it wouldn't be possible to take it from this leftovers. So the point is, the Eibishter commanded it and desired that it should be this way, and he gave the Yidden the ability that they should be able to fulfill the mitzvah fully, completely. This was the way the Eibishter wanted the mitzvah to be done, that it should be taken fully from the entire part, from both halves. So the point basically over here is that the Eibishter is giving the Yidden, not only is he giving them the mitzvah, but the Eibishter is also giving the Yidden the ability to fulfill the mitzvah. The mitzvah has a very specific requirement. It should be taken fully from this half with nothing left out. So the Eibishter makes it possible to give them the exact numbers that they should be able to take, a 50th or 1 of 500 without anything left out. But there's something else that the Torah still has to address here. Okay, because now according to this we do understand why the Torah has to tell us the number of all the plunder, the numbers of the specific minim that they got, to point out or everything was an exact number. And the Torah also tells us exactly the meches, the taxes that they gave to show us how they had the ability to demonstrate and write, how they had the ability to fulfill the mitzvah exactly, perfectly, without anything left over. But the question still remains, couldn't have the Torah just written the amount of 1/2, and then it's not necessary to write and repeat the whole thing again, what the other half was? The other half that Klal Yisrael received is the same number. 1/2 went to those that went out to battle, and the other half went to those that did not, to the rest of Klal Yisrael. So why is it necessary for the Torah to write the other half? So here the Rebbe says there's another question that the Torah is coming to address. The question still is, and this is similar to the point that the Ramban says, that the Rebbe quoted before. HaKadosh Baruch Hu tziva lachtzos es hamalkoyach. The Eibishter commanded to divide the plunder. So they say meres, shetzarech li is beis chalokim shavim. The Eibishter wants it should be 2 equal amounts that should be divided equally. So now the question is, even just to divide it equally could be a very challenging thing. The amount of plunder they had here was a pretty big number. So to count such a large number of cattle and sheep and animals and people from the beginning of the count to the end of the count took a while. And then following this, only then were they able to divide it. And only after they divided it properly are they able to then take the proper tax from each min separately. And what would be expected, it's impossible that during this entire time, not a single person, not a single one of the animals died. From such a big number, of 840,000. That's the total sum of everything that we have over here, 840,000. So in this whole entire period, between the counting and the dividing and then taking the tax, not even one died to create a problem. If one dies, that's all you need. If only one dies, now you have a problem. You can't divide it equally anymore. There's going to be some remainder here. There's one half is more than the other. And then the meiser, or the meches, the tax, is not going to be exact either. So, and not even one died in order to enable the Yidden to fulfill the mitzvah. If only one dies, so now you can't fulfill the Eibishter's mitzvah to divide it exactly in half. And also, now you have leftovers. You're going to take meiser, but you're going to take the meches, the tax, but you're going to end up having leftovers that's not going to be exact. You won't be able to fulfill the mitzvah the way the Eibishter desired the mitzvah to be fulfilled. So the Torah separately tells us the other half that the half they gave to the people that went out to war and the other half that were given to the Yidden, that it was the same number. To let us know that the two halves were the same. Through this entire period of time, it remained the same number. There was also something else that was completely unusual. That not a single one of the people or the animals that they had in their plunder died during this time period. So besides the Pella, that what they got in the beginning was an exact round number, what they took from Midian, the plunder, was the exact number that enabled them to do the mitzvah perfectly, to take the exact meches from everything they had fully and not to have any leftovers. Also, later on, during the time period when they counted, divided, and took the meches, during that entire time period, nothing changed either. Something very unusual, that nothing died in between, and they were able to fulfill the mitzvah perfectly. The Gambazek Canal, so here the Rebbe points out as well, this is not a nest, the way that Ramban puts it, that it's a miracle. In the Pshutish Mikra, it's not a nest, but it's something that's extremely unusual. And the reason why it happens is this is all to enable the Yidden to fulfill the mitzvah. And therefore the half that Yidden get has to be the exact same to the other half that the people that went out in battle got. So that enables them to fulfill one part of the mitzvah, to divide it equally. And also that there should be no leftovers of the meches, of the tax that they're giving, so that they can fulfill that part of the mitzvah perfectly as well. So therefore the Torah has to tell us the full total number. The Torah has to tell us the number of all the minim of each one of the species separately, to see how each one of the species separately had that exact number, and also to point out how when they divided it, it still remained the same number. When they gave the meches, which was a while later, it still remained the same number, to point out how the Eibishter allowed everything to happen in such a way, or orchestrated the events to happen in such a way that they are able to fulfill the mitzvah perfectly. So now we come to the second question that Rebbe asks. Why doesn't the Torah ever tell us the number of what they gave, the 50th, that the Yidden gave to the Levium? Once the Torah says all of these details, that addresses all the aspects of what happened here, to show, to demonstrate how unusual this was, to enable them to fulfill the mitzvah, to tell us the exact amount of the 50th that they gave to the Levium is not necessary to spell out. It's self-understood. Therefore the Torah just says in general terms that a 50th was given to the Levium. That wouldn't add anything in explaining the ability to fulfill the mitzvah. So seemingly what the Rebbe is saying is, the first time around when the Torah says that they took 1 of 500, there the Torah wants to spell out how they were able to take the meches perfectly, the exact amount, they had the exact round number they needed to be able to take the full meches without any leftovers, and the Torah tells us the full number that they gave. Once the Torah says that once, the Torah doesn't have to spell out that detail again, b'negei to the echad achas min hachamishim, because it already said it once, and it's self-understood that the same thing was when they had to take a 50th to give to the Levium, that it was the perfect amount and the perfect number without any leftovers. Okay, now the Rebbe explains this Indian over here, that the Rebbe now will focus on this question: why the Torah tells us the exact number of the taxes that the ones that went out in war gave, and does not spell out specifically the details of the taxes that those that the rest of Klal Yisrael gave. Al derech halacha, so now according to halacha, not in Pshutish Mikra, but according to halacha, yesh l'taretz achila kanal, we can explain the difference in the following way. Sha'akosov mefaret mispar ha-meches, the Torah spells out the half that was given as meiser for those that went out to war, and does not spell out the half of the Yidden. So Shitta Sabahag, the Shitta of the Bahag is as follows: this mitzvah they had here to give from this plunder, the meches, the tax, to the Kohanim, to the Levium, is a mitzvah. The Rambam disagrees. The Rambam's opinion is, since this is not a mitzvah, that is relevant in future generations, it was just for that time period, the Rambam's rule always is, anything that was only for one time period is not counted as a mitzvah. Haramban ba'asagais of metarat shittas habahag. The Ramban in his Hasogis, where he asks his questions on the Rambam, he argues in the Rambam, so he explains the opinion of the Bahag. Umefarish ki Bahag svirelei shetrumas midyan hi mitzvah nehagas l'doiris. The Bahag argues on this very point. The Bahag says that this mitzvah here about giving the tax of the plunder of war is actually a mitzvah in all future generations for all the plunder that they get, that they have to give the tax. So in the Sefer Zohar Harakia, he asks the question, it's a clear Gemara in Menachos that says that this tax that they gave by the war with Midyan is not something that's relevant for future generations. So how could the Ramban and the Bahag argue with the opinion of the Rambam? So the Noida B'Yehuda in a Tshuva answers, when the Gemara says it is not relevant for future generations, it's talking about the tax that all of the Yidden gave of their half. Those that remain home, did not go out to war, there's no mitzvah for them to give a tax of what they received. But the tax that the Torah here says, those that went out into battle, that they had to give, this is for all future generations, according to the Bahag's opinion, according to the Ramban's opinion. This is the point that the Noida B'Yehuda says. So now, based on this, the Rebbe says, we could understand why the Pasuk elaborates regarding the tax of those that went to the war and keeps it short, b'nigeya, to the tax of the Yidden that remained home. Why the Torah elaborates more regarding the tax that was taken from those that went out into war. This is the mitzvah for all future generations. Which is not the case regarding the truma, the tax that was taken from the rest of Yidden. This is not something that's relevant for future generations. So therefore, the Torah keeps it short and concise and just says that they fulfill the mitzvah in that time, but it doesn't get into the details. It's not relevant for future generations. So that's the Hasber, al pi halacha, according to the opinion of the Bahag, why the Torah addresses this differently regarding the Meiser of the Yidden and the Meiser of those that went out into the war. The lesson we can take from this, going back to the point that the Rebbe explained before in the Pshat of the Pasuk, that the Eibishter made it or orchestrated it, that the Yidden got the exact round numbers, the exact perfect numbers to be able to divide it in a way that there should be no leftovers, to divide it perfectly, to give the meches, the tax perfectly. So there's an amazing lesson that comes from this. At kamo gedayla hachavivos kiyem ha-mitzvahs ha'idei bnei Yisrael. How beloved it is, the fulfillment of mitzvahs of Yidden. Shekama v'kama inyanim, d'leishchichi klal u'klal, many things that are extremely, highly unusual, karu v'nasu, happened and occurred here, u'bilvad shebnei Yisrael yikaimu mitzvah bishlei musa, only to enable Yidden to fulfill the mitzvah perfectly. It's not only like you would expect that you find in other places that while a Yid is doing a mitzvah, the Eibishter then gives him the ability that he shouldn't have any disturbances and anything stopping him of fulfilling the mitzvah then. Even before the time of the fulfillment of the mitzvah comes. The Eibishter is orchestrating things happening, that a while later, the fulfillment of the mitzvah should be able to be done perfectly. Like we see right over here. That the animals and the people that they brought from Midyan, the numbers of each one of the species that they took were the exact amount that allowed them to do the mitzvah perfectly. And also, for a long period of time, not one of them died from the people, Adam, V'Behema, V'Chulu. So the Eibishter is orchestrating this already long before. The Yidden took all the plunder, all of the possessions, all the animals and the people from Midian, and this was already planned in advance that there's going to be the exact number available for the Yidden to be able to fulfill the mitzvah. So it's understood that at the time when the war happened, it should be the exact number in the thousands that they needed, the exact number to be able to give the tax of 50th or 1 of 500. So the business of the people of Midian, there's business with the animals, trading animals, buying, selling, and also gidul mikneim v'chulu. They are raising their cattle. Zman rav lefnezeh, long before that they should have the exact amount of animals born and there available that the Yidden should be able to fulfill the mitzvah perfectly. Not one more and not one less. So b'signa nacher, to put this in different words, Zman oruch lefnei ha-milchama, even a long time even before this war. Sibiv HaKadosh Baruch Hu kama v'kama sibis. The Eibishter is orchestrating many things to happen. Sheyasku anshe Midian b'maso matan. The people of Midian, their business dealings with their cattle, with their animals, should be done in such a way, to raise their animals in such a way, that when the moment will come and the Yidden will go there into war, and the Yidden will have this plunder and they'll have to fulfill the mitzvah, with the captive and the plunder of Midian, they'll have the ability to fulfill this perfectly. So the Eibush is orchestrating something in an entire country of Midian, all for the purpose that a long while later, Yidden are going to come at the right moment and fulfill the mitzvah properly. This is an amazing lesson b'negeh to how a Yid has to look at the world b'chlal. There are so many things that are being orchestrated in the world and are happening in the world, so that one Yid should be able to come along and, for example, fulfill the mitzvah of lulav and esrik, to take that esrik from a tree somewhere in Italy and fulfill the mitzvah, and so on and on. In every case, when we see things that are going on in the world, the Eibush is orchestrating many events just so that Yidden should be able to fulfill the mitzvahs. So this is a lesson for every individual. A person should not at all get affected from any disturbance that he has, from anything that seems to be preventing him of doing a mitzvah. If sometimes it may appear to a person that it's impossible for him to fulfill a mitzvah, al yachash, he should not be concerned, it's not true. He should be sure in his heart and trust the Eibishter, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Sibiv, the Yisabiv Sibis. The Eibishter is orchestrating the things for you, and he will continue to make it possible. And he'll make it possible for you to be able to fulfill the mitzvah perfectly, like we see it was over here in the Torah. The Torah records this and shows us how the Eibishter enabled the Yidden to fulfill the mitzvah perfectly. So this is the lesson we take from this inyan, that in every situation, a Yid has to know that the Eibishter is there and he's orchestrating matters in a way that he should have the ability to fulfill the mitzvah perfectly.